For 40 years, China's economy grew at an average of 10% per year, every year, for 4 decades. This is the greatest sustained economic growth in human history. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty. China built the world's largest manufacturing base. China became the second largest economy on Earth, and the world assumed this would continue. Forever, or at least for another generation. But something is changing. Quietly, slowly, and most people are not paying attention. China's economy is hitting structural limits that no amount of government spending can fix. Limits that are built into the system itself. Limits that are demographic, financial, and technological. And these limits are converging right now, at the same time, creating a crisis that China's leaders know is coming, but cannot stop. The real estate sector has already crashed. Youth unemployment hit 21% before the government stopped publishing the numbers. The debt burden is now larger than China's entire GDP. The population is shrinking for the first time in decades, and foreign investment is leaving at record speed. This is not a recession, this is structural decline. And structural decline is different from a normal economic downturn. You cannot stimulus spend your way out of structural decline. You cannot cut interest rates your way out. You cannot build more infrastructure, because the problem is not lack of demand. The problem is the model itself. The model that made China rich is now making China fragile. And today I am going to explain exactly why. The 5 structural walls China is about to hit. Why China's leaders cannot fix them. And what happens to the world when the engine of global growth starts sputtering. Because this does not just affect China, it affects every country that sells to China, buys from China, or competes with China, which is every country on Earth. Let me start with the first wall, the debt wall. For the last 20 years, China has grown its economy by borrowing and building. When growth slowed, China borrowed more and built more. Roads, bridges, railways, airports, entire cities. This is called investment-led growth. And it worked. Building things creates jobs. Jobs create incomes. Incomes create spending. Spending creates growth. But here is the problem. You can only build so much. Eventually, you run out of useful things to build. China built roads to places with no traffic. Railways to cities with no passengers. Apartments that nobody lives in. Entire ghost cities. Ordos in Inner Mongolia was built for 1 million people. Today it has 100,000. Across China there are an estimated 65 million empty apartments. These are not investments. These are liabilities. They create debt but not value. And the debt is enormous. China's total debt, government, corporate and household, is now more than 300% of GDP. That means China owes 3 times its annual economic output. This is dangerous, because debt must be repaid. And if the investments that created the debt do not generate returns, the debt cannot be repaid. This is called a debt trap, and China is in it. How did it get this bad? Because local governments in China are incentivized to grow. The Communist Party evaluates local officials based on economic growth numbers. Grow fast, get promoted. Grow slow, get passed over. So local governments borrowed and built, not because the buildings were needed, but because building boosted growth numbers. This was rational behavior for individual officials. But it was catastrophic for the system, because now China has mountains of debt and millions of empty buildings, and the bill is coming due. The real estate crisis is the visible symptom. Evergrande, you may have heard of it, the world's most indebted real estate company, $300 billion in debt, collapsed in 2021. Evergrande was not an exception. It was the model. China's real estate sector was the engine of economic growth. At its peak, real estate accounted for 25 to 30% of China's GDP, more than any other country in history. Chinese households put 70% of their wealth into property. Chinese local governments funded themselves by selling land to developers. Chinese banks lent to developers who borrowed to build what buyers prepaid for apartments that did not yet exist. This was a pyramid, and pyramids collapse. Evergrande collapsed. Country Garden collapsed. Hundreds of smaller developers collapsed. Millions of Chinese households paid for apartments that will never be built. Hundreds of billions of dollars of wealth evaporated. Local governments that depended on land sales are now bankrupt. Banks that lent to developers are sitting on bad loans. This is a financial crisis playing out in slow motion, and the Chinese government is trying to manage it, trying to prevent full collapse. But it cannot make the losses disappear. Someone has to absorb them. Either the developers, or the banks, or the households, or the government. There is no scenario where this ends without enormous economic pain. China's property crisis is not a Lehman Brothers moment. It's worse. Lehman was one bank. China's real estate was the entire economy. 25% of GDP, 70% of household wealth, the engine of growth for 20 years. When that engine seizes up, you don't have a recession, you have a reordering of everything. and China's government is desperately trying to manage a collapse that's already happening in slow motion. The second wall, the demographic wall. China is running out of people, and this is not a future problem, this is happening now. In 2022, China's population shrank for the first time in 60 years. In 2023, it shrank again. China's birth rate is now one of the lowest in the world. The fertility rate is 1.09 children per woman. You need 2.1 to maintain population. China is at 1.09. This is catastrophic. Why did this happen? 3 reasons. First, the one-child policy. From 1980 to 2015, China enforced the most aggressive population control policy in human history. 35 years of limiting families to one child. This worked too well. It created a demographic time bomb, a rapidly aging population with a shrinking workforce to support it. Second, urbanization. When people move to cities, they have fewer children. Cities are expensive, apartments are small, children cost more. This is a global pattern. But China urbanized faster than anywhere else. 300 million people moved from rural areas to cities in 30 years. This accelerated the birth rate decline. Third, economic anxiety. Young Chinese people today do not want children. They call themselves lying flat. They have checked out. Why work hard to buy an overpriced apartment you can barely afford? Why bring children into a world of intense competition and economic uncertainty? Young Chinese are opting out, and the government cannot force them back in. China has tried everything. Baby bonuses, extended maternity leave, tax credits, free kindergarten. None of it is working. Because the problem is not incentives, the problem is culture and economics. Having children is expensive and exhausting, and young Chinese have decided it is not worth it. The demographic consequences are severe. By 2050, China will have 400 million people over 65, and a shrinking workforce to support them. This means less production, less consumption, higher pension costs, higher healthcare costs, a shrinking tax base, and slower growth. Demographics is destiny, and China's demographic destiny is contraction. The third wall, the productivity wall. For 40 years, China grew by doing 3 things: moving workers from low productivity farms to high productivity factories, investing massively in physical capital factories, roads, ports, power plants, and absorbing technology from the West through joint ventures, technology transfer, and in some cases theft. These 3 engines drove growth, but all 3 are running out of fuel. First, the labor migration engine is exhausted. Most Chinese farmers who can move to cities have moved. The easy gains from urbanization are gone. Second, the investment engine is exhausted. You can only build so many factories and roads before you run out of useful things to build. China is already past this point. Additional investment now adds less and less growth. The return on investment is declining. Third, the technology absorption engine is being cut off. The West is no longer willing to transfer technology to China. CHIPS Act, export controls, restrictions on joint ventures, blacklisting of Chinese companies. The pipeline of Western technology is closing, and China's domestic technology sector, while advanced in some areas, cannot replace everything the West provides. China is not yet able to make the most advanced semiconductors. It cannot match the West in pharmaceutical research. It is behind in aerospace. The easy path to productivity growth, absorb Western technology, is closing, and the hard path, genuine innovation, takes decades. China's growth miracle was based on a simple formula: take cheap labor, add Western technology, pour in investment, and grow. They've run out of cheap labor. The West stopped providing technology, and investment is now creating debt, not growth. When the formula stops working, what do you do? That's the question China cannot answer, and they know it. The fourth war, the geopolitical war. China's economy depends on exports. China manufactures for the world, but the world is changing its relationship with China. Why? Because the world realized it is too dependent on China. When COVID hit in 2020, the world discovered that China controlled critical supply chains, medicines, semiconductors, rare earths, electronics. The world could not get what it needed because it all came from China. And the world said, never again. So the West started decoupling. America passed the CHIPS Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing home, the Inflation Reduction Act to bring clean energy manufacturing home. The EU is incentivizing battery factories in Europe. Japan is subsidizing domestic chip production. India is aggressively courting factories leaving China. Vietnam, Mexico, and other countries are absorbing manufacturing that used to go to China. This is called China Plus One strategy. Companies keep some production in China, but also build facilities elsewhere, just in case. And as tensions over Taiwan escalate, this trend is accelerating. Multinational companies are not waiting to see if there will be a war over Taiwan. They are already moving, because the cost of staying dependent on China is too high. What does this mean for China? It means the export engine is weakening. The factories that employed hundreds of millions of Chinese workers may not be able to grow further. Some are already shrinking. China is losing its manufacturing edge, not because Chinese workers are less skilled, but because the political risk of sourcing from China is too high. The fifth wall, the innovation wall. China wants to move up the value chain, to stop making cheap goods and start making advanced products. High-end semiconductors, advanced pharmaceuticals, aerospace, artificial intelligence, quantum computing. This is the plan. Made in China 2025, China 2049. Become the world's technology leader. The problem: innovation is hard in an authoritarian system. Innovation requires freedom to experiment, freedom to fail, freedom to challenge received wisdom. In China, challenging received wisdom is dangerous. The education system emphasizes memorization, not creativity. The research system emphasizes quantity of publications, not quality of ideas. The corporate system emphasizes compliance, not disruption. And the censorship system restricts the free flow of information that drives innovation. Yes, China has impressive technology in some areas. TikTok, WeChat, electric vehicles, high-speed rail. But these are engineering achievements, not scientific breakthroughs. China is excellent at taking existing technologies and making them cheaper and more efficient. That is incremental innovation. But the next generation of technology, advanced AI, quantum computing, biotech, aerospace, requires fundamental scientific discovery, and that requires the kind of intellectual freedom that China's system does not allow. The most innovative companies in the world, Apple, Google, Nvidia, TSMC, operate in societies with free speech, independent universities, and open information flows. China is trying to innovate while controlling information. This is a fundamental contradiction. You cannot build a truly innovative economy while also controlling what people can think, say, and research. China wants to be the world's technology leader, but innovation requires freedom to challenge authority, freedom to fail, freedom to say the emperor has no clothes. In China, saying the emperor has no clothes gets you 18 years in prison. You can't build a Silicon Valley in a surveillance state. It's never been done, and there's a reason for that. Can China overcome these walls? Partially, not fully. Here is the honest assessment. On the debt wall, China can manage the real estate crisis. It can bail out banks. It can absorb losses through state institutions, but it cannot eliminate the debt, and it cannot restore confidence in real estate as an investment. The era of property-led growth is over. On the demographic wall, China cannot reverse this. Demographics take generations to change. Even if Chinese women started having 3 children today, which they will not, the effects would not be felt for 20 years. China's workforce will shrink. Its population will age. This cannot be stopped. On the productivity wall, China can improve, but it cannot move up the value chain as fast as planned. The technology decoupling will slow China's productivity growth, and without foreign technology, domestic innovation must carry more weight. That takes time. On the geopolitical wall, China can diversify its export markets. Belt and Road countries can absorb some manufacturing, but they cannot replace the United States and Europe as export destinations. Not in purchasing power, not in volume. The Western markets matter, and Western trust in China is damaged. On the innovation wall, China can make progress, but fundamental innovation in an authoritarian system is constrained. China will make incremental advances, but the breakthroughs that define the next generation of technology are more likely to come from free societies. So what does this mean? It means China's growth will slow, not collapse, but slow significantly, from 10% annual growth to perhaps 3 or 4%, maybe less. This is still growth, but it changes everything, because China's political stability depends on continued prosperity. The Communist Party's legitimacy depends on delivering growth. If growth slows to 3%, youth unemployment rises, real wages stagnate, and the debt crisis deepens, the deal between the party and the people is under stress. Not broken, but stressed, and stressed systems eventually break. The question is not whether China will face this reckoning. The question is when, and what happens when it does.